G'day there, Ozysturm here, country Victorian gamer of Star Wars Armada, Star Wars Legion, Star Wars X-Wing, Dystopian Wars, Battletech, Flames of War, and many other games. Today, I start a new project for my Star Wars Legion. This is a Imperial AT-DT, or all-terrain defense turret, as seen in the Solo movie. Obviously, there isn't an official model from Fantasy Flight Games yet, so I have purchased this 3D version of it in the scale of Legion from Garfie's Games, which is an eBay store here in Australia. Links are in the description if you are interested in any of his items. So, first off, this is basically a step-by-step of how I'm going to assemble it, what are the pose that I'm going to choose for it, and doing some snapshots of exactly how I'm going to then assemble parts of it together and then paint it before I do the final assembly. So as you can see, here are all the parts on the table. There are a lot of different parts, as you can see. I have tried to group them into various sections as to what I plan on doing together. So a couple of things to note. The main turret, I'm going to paint that separate with just basically the little keyhole, which is right there. Going to glue those two pieces together, spray paint it, undercoat. The next bit is this base right here, which is these four pieces, and same thing. I will glue them together, paint them prior to assembly. The gun and the crew, same thing. I'll put all the gun together, leave it separate. Same thing with the driver, paint that, keep it separate. The legs, I'm going to fully assemble both of these legs. And as you can see, let's go down. I have already articulated the bottom by drilling a hole through and putting a nail. This is only a standalone, because I do have some brass rods that I'm going to use instead of the nail. It's just more so to get an idea of where it's going to articulate before I do the gluing section of it. So I want to work out how I'm going to stand with it. So like I said, the first phase I'm going to do is just put a little bit of glue, super glue. I've already pre-cleaned all of these and also ran them through a bit through the wash with some soapy water to remove all excess gum material. I'm going to leave it open at the flap at like a something like a 70-degree mark, 70 to 90 degree mark, like that. Wait until it dries and then continue on. Secondly, I'll start off with the other section of the base. So it's going to have the top sitting on here. I have a piece of armor that goes along the slot here, that actually goes into this slot. So just cleaning out the inside. Slot it in, and it should be nice and tight as such. Same time, on the back, this little radiator grill will sit somewhere about there. So I've sanded down this radiator grill so it's nice and flat. And placing it in. Lastly, with the back end of it, I've cleaned the edges. Just put a little bit of the super glue and then attach it. Like so. Obviously, once it's fully glued, you can go over and just add a little bit more glue at the connector points if you feel as though it isn't taking. Or to even fill up some of the gaps. And then leave to dry. Probably best to leave it on its side. That way your glue is not touching anything that is of importance. Next thing, we're going to do the gun. Now, how the gun sits is that inside here, there is a section where this base plate will go and sit nice and comfortably. On top of this base plate will be this section of the gun, which will then sit back like that. The recoil mount, or where the actual shells get dispensed, etc., will be then fitted onto the back as such. The two lasers will then go onto the holes that are on either side, with the main cannon being fitted out the front. Now, because I want this to be a little bit sticky when I do glue it in, I'm going to put a little bit of this super glue in first, so that then it hardens up ever so slightly while I'm gluing the rest of the parts in. Now at this point you've got to play around with it a little bit, because obviously the gun may not be fully stable at this point, which means you may need to use a little bit of ingenuity to get something to place it in the balance of where you want it to go. Now that I've got that all set, I want to re-glue this side of the equation. like with the actual gunner, he's going to sit in this little groove here all by himself. Now I can do this in two ways. I can either glue it in, or I can possibly drill a little bit into the base and into this section right here to allow magnets, so that I can swap this out for my other two chairs that I've got, mainly the chair that is empty as well as the one that I have for a Rebel version. So I'm going to do that off screen to put some drill holes in to get it the nice right size for some magnets here and on there. Stay tuned. So yesterday I started assembling the AT-DT, and I've ran into a couple of issues that I want to raise before I continue my video. To start off with, the successes. This piece for the base unit, very good, very nicely fitted. The main section, very good with the magnet now, meaning I can exchange the pilot with the Imperial pilot and the Rebel pilot, or blank, and it's nice solid. I used a 5mm magnet at the base, just in here, and then a 3mm magnet through this stool area. And it works out pretty well because the surface area of the magnet at the base is larger. So even if there is a little bit of misalignment, it doesn't matter as much on the seat. What I also found with this unit here, the base of the actual gun, when it came time to actually gluing my gun together and then trying to dry fit with the two las cannons here, medium pulse las guns, las cannons, I couldn't quite fit them through the hole here. So I had to snap them off and re-drill the holes there, which, as you can see, I've done, and they are okay. The other thing of note is this barrel here is very tricky. If you happen to glue it and someone come up and jump behind you and scare you like a certain 7-year-old, that is my son, it can snap. So I needed to figure out a way of reassembling it because it snapped in not one place, it snapped in two places. This area beyond and down here. I ended up drilling all the way through from around about this point through to here, to just on a very fine drill piece. I think it was maybe a 1.5 mil. And I just took it very slowly, drilled it all through, and then used a paper clip, snapping off a section of it, making sure that it fit in to give it that straight look. I'll still probably, seeing there is still some little bit of holes up here and on this side, I'll probably use a little bit of green stuff to fill it in, and just basically use a file or a knife to just replicate the technique at the contours of the rest of the model. So those three bits are all ready for painting. The next bit is, of course, getting the legs. What I'm going to do is I'm going to glue one leg in the sitting position, while the other one will take a more of a leap forward. Here we go. So the first step that I'm going to do with the legs is, of course, remove the nail. I'm going to use these small little pieces of brass rod, and I'm going to secure them in place by using some green stuff and super glue. With the green stuff, what I'm going to do is firstly fill up one of the holes. Keep it as pliable as possible. Don't fill it all the complete way up, because obviously you're going to need to have some space for when the actual brass rod goes into place. Then once that is done, you want to install it, pin it through, get it into the right length, and just slightly push it into the green stuff on that side. And as you can see already, the green stuff has enough tackiness and strength to hold it in place. Then all we need to do is just put the green stuff into this hole once we push the rod into the correct spot where we want it to be, which is right about there. And this is why I use a hobby knife and sculpting tool on the back of it. It helps immensely when doing something like this to get it into right position. And even if you want to push it down a little bit more, that's when the other side of it comes in handy. Now that that's done, set it aside, just like that. You can use a little bit of a prop if you want to hold it up. And let it dry. While we wait for the green stuff to dry on the feet, we can actually assemble some of the upper leg area. On the base of the walker, we have these little slots. These will then have an upper leg joint connecting forward with the protective shield facing towards where the gun is. So eventually it will end up looking like that. Then the next part of the leg, which is this bit, it also has a insert whereby it will go backwards along the length of the model. If we remove that aside, then a lower leg area situates here. And then this bit will attach into the foot. Now, we can play around with a little bit on where we want it to go, as long as we understand that if we move it around to make it higher or to move it wider, we have to keep in alignment. One thing I'm going to do is this part I'm not going to glue yet. I'm going to leave that aside until I've done the rest of the foot before gluing. This section, however, I can glue. Seeing it's going to be at least on one of the feet, it's going to be at a 90 degrees. .95 maybe degrees there. I also have a little cavity here. In this cavity, there goes another shield plate guard. Just over the top. Put a little bit more glue on. And there's another one out the back here, which is this bit. I'm not 100% certain where it resides on here. I'm thinking probably about there. Anything lower and it'll hit them. So I reckon it's probably about there. So let's glue that in as well. And that's pretty much one of the legs, upper leg area, ready to go. I'm going to leave it there to dry, because with the second one on the other side, rather than having it sort of standing next to each other, I want one of them to be almost reaching forward, like it's stepping forward. How that will look in my mind is this section will go up, that section will go up and go somewhere like that. Dry fitting is a really good thing if you're planning on doing dynamic movement in your model, because it gives you an idea of what it looks like. If it was a case of walking away or lifting up its leg, I'd probably still have that arm up, but maybe have it way back here. But with the other one standing up, basically straight up, supporting. I want this leg moving forward. So probably about there. And then it will draw the leg like that. So yeah. But I will wait until the rest of the parts are dry before continuing on. As you can see, my leg is now fully articulated. It hasn't been glued in this point here and this point here. This one's just held in by a pin, while here it's being held in by this little addition of some plastic at the rear. Holds it nice in place at the moment. Why I haven't glued these two sections is because now I can play around with how it's going to move, to sit, to work out where on my other leg it's going to actually be, which is going to be on this side. Now, what I want to do is have it so that rather than having the legs standing down on the actual base flat, like this one is, I want to have it so that it is just about to land a foot or taking off the foot. How I'm doing that is on the back of it, I've added a little piece of clear plastic. This raises the foot ever so slightly and will provide a stable base. I could also use something like a clear plastic section, like a spacer, or this is a Fantasy Flight Games base for their Star Wars Armada squadrons, which is also the right size for it, and it's again clear plastic. This one comes from Dystopian Wars for their flying models bases, and you can cut it to different sizes to actually get that nice close look. I'm going to, with these feet, have it so that the claws are just touching it to give it that spread out support look. Like such. I haven't worked out exactly where this third joint is going to be glued yet, but I'm going to glue up the feet and work out the positioning of where it is going forward. Once this is glued, then I can glue the top part of the feet on, and then I will be ready to actually start painting it. So with this, I'm going to put a little bit of super glue on each of the feet. But rather than putting it on straight away, I'm just going to leave it to rest for a few seconds. So it starts creating that tacky process. I'm going to then work out exactly how I'm going to situate it. Whether I have it low cut or high cut. So maybe something like that. swings it a bit low, but on the other hand, I can fiddle around with these little sections up here to give it that angle as well. It's more so getting this angle right. Which I think is going to be probably about that angle there. Yeah. Anyway, back to the feet. The glue should be nice and tacky now. If the feet go on correctly, then they should just slide in. Obviously, you may need to support it flat while you're trying to get it just right so it looks as though it's sort of raised. Once it's in the right position, best to turn it over and let it dry upside down. Preferably without it touching anything else. As for the last bit, I'll glue that shortly, and then I will take all of this out to my spray booth out in the shed and give it an undercoat of uniform grey, and I will start the painting process, I reckon. The base that is coming is from Battle Kiwi. It is a clear acrylic base completely. That should arrive here in the next day or two. As you can see, it's still all apart. I have not assembled it. I have tested it a couple of times just to see how it all fits, and it all fits fine. But before I do the final gluing, I want to do the painting of it all and then be able to put it onto an appropriate base. I'm going to basically spray paint it with this uniform grey by Army Painter, and then I'm going to use some of this grey sear coloration as a top coat to give it that sheen, similar to what I've done with the AT-ST. I won't be doing a video while I'm spraying it, but once I've finished doing the 2 coats of spray paint, then I'll be starting a new set of videos. Now that the undercoat is dry, I have glued the legs to the main body. The main turret section is still magnetized, so I can remove the top part. But now I need to get the positioning of the legs right before I glue the hinge points that I introduced here and here, before I can start work on painting. And the best way of doing that is obviously to do a little bit of trial and error, moving it around. The dice cup behind is just being used to, so I could put the weight of the main body on and just move the legs around a little bit so I can see their movement and try and get it right. You can see that I have gone for a lopsided approach, just like what you saw in Han Solo's story. And I'm going to pretty much have this leg go forward a little bit. On that one's more of a bracing leg on the rear. That one right there. So I'm going to maneuver it around and then I'll be gluing it down to this base and see how I go. I've also done the Rebel pilot for it, just as a bit of a test color to just see how it looks, what sort of colors do I need. A couple of things that I notice is that I'll have to do a seatbelt color. There is a little bit of cushioning on the seat there that is underneath the model itself, so I have to put in some sort of texture color. I haven't really worked out how the control panels work on it yet, whether or not they will be a metallic color or anything. I'm going to put some metallics on the bottom gears, the foot pedals, etc. See how that goes and just basically work my way around, see what I can do to actually get the seat and the control panel right. Apologies, as I have been able to do a little bit of painting on the AT-DT while a number of people were in the house doing some things which meant that I couldn't record at the time. But going through what I've done so far, I've done a uniform grey undercoat, then a ghost grey over the top of it, over all the models. I have then painted the pilot. I've also painted a few bits and pieces like the guardrails in the metal, done some shading for the vents. I've used this black, a Woolplock bronze for the gun barrel, which I'll also be using for the two laser cannons that are underneath that I still have to add on yet. For the legs, they're now fully glued into position where I want them, and they're not quite set on the base yet because I want to do the varnishing and sealing first before I glue it down. I have attempted to scruff it up a little bit, and by doing like a flesh wash tone on the base to give it that muddy look. And then using Null Oil, I've just given this leg so far a bit of shading and the main base some shading. So this leg here is without shading, with shading. And yes, there is splotches on the feet so far, but that will be taken care of when I do the next bit for that leg. All up, I still like the model. I have had it fully assembled, which I will show to you right now. So I can either have it straight looking, or I can have it looking on the side, something like that. I haven't really decided where I'm going to put the legs yet. So finally, I have the AT-DT fully assembled, fully painted. I still need to do 2 more of the pilots for it, but for my video on how to assemble and paint the AT-DT, I thought it better to finish it off soon and show you some size comparison between the AT-DT and the AT-ST. Couple of initial impressions. I love the model. It looks nice and clean. It has that Star Wars feel. It has a lot of that same similar look that the AT-ST has, but it's a lot more chunkier in sections. Downside, scale. The scale for the AT-DT in comparison to the AT-ST is not quite right, I believe. I believe that how Star Wars explained and Wikipedia, Star Wars Wikipedia explains the AT-DT is that it's supposed to be 3/4 of the size of an AT-ST. And yes, although I do have the legs quite high on this, I would probably assume that it should have been a bit smaller than the AT-ST. Even so, like for like, both of them have a lot similar mechanics on the legs. Obviously, the AT-DT has more of a look of a AT-AT, while the AT-ST is a lot flatter and very similar to what we generally see in Star Wars universe on an AT-PT, which is all-terrain personal transport. And generally, I do think that the model is pretty good. It is very fiddly, and it takes a while to get it right. I would not recommend this for a very much beginner. This is something that would definitely be in a advanced player's wheelhouse to actually try and make. Certainly using a 3D printer system already with all of the imaging is probably best, rather than to try and doing it from scratch. Shrinking the scale of it by around about maybe 5 to 10% would be appropriate to get it a bit smaller without losing too much of the details. Other than that, probably the only other comment that I have to make is that you need to dry fit it a lot of times. Make sure that you know exactly where you want your AT-DT to actually sit. As you can see, my AT-ST is quite flat, while the AT-DT is a bit more robust and able to move or look like it's moving. The turret I've magnetized because I want to be able to remove it for safe transporting, but also the way that it's lopsided and that gives it a really good feel of it being moved. Lastly, now that we've compared it against the scale of an AT-ST, have a couple of stormtroopers also by Asmodee and a Z95, and as you can see, it looks pretty good on the table. If I take it off, both of them tower over the miniatures like they should, and I think it will be pretty good on my battlefield going forward for games. Obviously, I do have an Imperial pilot that's currently drying at the moment, but the pilot is all magnetized like I previously stated. That's about it for my AT-DT. I'll probably post a video when I finally get it up to the point where I'm actually playing a game with it. Rule-wise, I'm going to use Admiral Tater's custom card designer to create a card for it. I'm going to certainly make it weaker than the AT-ST in terms of that it will only have 2 weapons on it, namely the twin las cannons and the main ordnance cannon. It's also going to be armored, but it's going to have weak points to the side and rear, simply because there's no armored on that area. Other bits, I'm not sure about how much points I would be putting it at. I believe that, just off the top of my head, I believe that the AT-ST is about 130 points in the Legion. And it might be reduced by now, depending on when the viewers view this. But I would imagine that the AT-DT is probably going to be around maybe the 110 mark. I can't see it being more expensive than the AT-ST, but certainly I do not see it being very much less expensive. I do think that both the AT-DT and the AT-ST have specific spots within the Imperial organization. One being for artillery support and general warfare, while the other one is more for a scout role, but also a suppressor unit in urban environments. My next project that I will be working on is probably getting back into the Battletech. I still have my Kickstarter on its way. I still have not received any confirmation, and it's now 3 to 4 months overdue now. But I know that there is no one in Australia that has received it yet either. I do have PAX, Oz PAX, in about 3 weeks' time, in which I will be going down to Melbourne and potentially picking up some items there for either Star Wars Legion or alternatively for Battletech. Obviously, with the October releases of Star Wars Legion, I do intend to get the Imperial Riot Squad. The main issue is that will it be in stock actually at PAX, or will I need to actually go to another store while I'm in Melbourne to pick that up at the same time? But if you have enjoyed this video, if you have enjoyed my content in general, please like, please subscribe, please leave a comment on this or any of my other videos. And if you do decide to leave a comment, if you want to make any recommendations on how much the AT-DT should be costed as in Star Wars Legion, whether or not there's anything that you think that I should consider when I'm creating the card, or even if someone has already created a card for a Star Wars Legion AT-DT, that would be greatly appreciated. But for now, I am Ozysturm, and I will see you on the table next time. Bye for now.